Do Georgia fans understand that if they lose this game against Tennessee, they lose their shot at a national championship? From Conway, South Carolina. First question, do we all believe that's true? Maybe some of you haven't thought about it, and that's a little shock to the senses. Well, let's think about it. That's what we're here for. It's Thursday night. We got a little time. Do we believe that? Do we believe that Georgia has to win against Tennessee, or they're just out of the playoff? That's the way we normally talk about Clemson, since we just predicted their game this week. Because normally Clemson has a pretty relatively weak strength of schedule, and it's just assumed they need to go undefeated to make it in, and they do a lot of the time. Well, Georgia could be in that boat right now. Let's take a look at the schedule here. They got the Oregon win, which looks extremely impressive in week 1, and then a whole lot of nothing as it relates to what the committee would think. And then they got Tennessee this week. If they lose against Tennessee at home, you got Mississippi State, Kentucky, Georgia Tech. Your problem is you would need Tennessee to lose twice if you're going to make it to Atlanta. So let's just ask ourselves, what are the paths here? Because I think it's a pretty worthwhile question to discuss. And we're in November now, so we're not too far away from this. The case for a one-loss Georgia, if Georgia loses this weekend, that's the premise, what are the cases for them making the playoff? Well, the first one is somehow they still win the SEC East, they go to Atlanta, they win the SEC title. That's virtually impossible because Tennessee would have to lose 2 games from Missouri, South Carolina, and Vandy, which is just not happening. So absent that, we then have to ask ourselves, let's say Georgia finishes. First off, they got to go the rest of the way undefeated. Okay, let's just, for argument's sake, assume they do. They lose to Tennessee, but they go undefeated the rest of the way. They're 11-1. They're just sitting at home. They don't go to Atlanta. At that point, we have to take the college football rankings or the college football playoff rankings, and we have to ask ourselves which teams are in above a one-loss non-SEC champion Georgia. And the answer is pretty clearly, if Clemson goes 12-0 in the ACC, and they're the champion, they're in. If TCU goes 12-0 in the Big 12, they win the conference, I believe they're in. If Ohio State or Michigan run the table, they win the Big 10, they're in. The follow-up question is, what does the committee do with a one-loss Ohio State that's in Georgia's shoes? They don't go to their own conference title game. Or Michigan, one-loss Michigan, doesn't go to the Big 10 title game. How do they compare? That's where that Oregon win could be very, very important. In the SEC, though, here's the disaster scenario for Georgia. The disaster scenario is Alabama runs through the rest of their slate. Bama goes to Atlanta, and they beat Tennessee in a rematch because at that point, the committee's taken Bama, and they're far more likely to take Tennessee over you. So, and they're certainly not taking 3 SEC teams, so that would be bad. So you need to root against Bama. If Tennessee beats you, you need to pull for Tennessee to win by 1,000,000 the rest of the way, and you need to grab onto their coattails. What a world we would be living in, where we're using language like Georgia needs to hold on to Tennessee's coattails. That seems so far away as even a remote possibility at the beginning of this year. So the Pac-12 is the other one I want to look at. A USC that's a one-loss Pac-12 champ. There are certain portions of this country, and I'm not so sure some of those portions aren't on the playoff committee, that would be frothing at the mouth to put that USC team in there. I think we all know that. The Oregon, even though Oregon's ranked higher than USC right now, it may be, I could be wrong here, it may be a little tougher, only because if Oregon's a one-loss Pac-12 champ and that committee looks and they say to themselves, we think a one-loss Pac-12 champ is equivalent with a one-loss non-SEC champ Georgia, then you got the head-to-head thing, which goes against Oregon. Here's my counter. I was asking Jesse this. I don't traffic in the playoff rankings a lot. You guys know I truly don't care about this stuff. So my question is, the head-to-head's only supposed to matter as a tiebreaker, right? So if we were to get in this hypothetical world where Oregon wins the Pac-12 championship, therefore they are a conference champ, and you're comparing them to Georgia, which is a non-conference champ, the only way that Oregon, having lost to Georgia, is even supposed to enter into the equation is if the committee says, okay, we view those two as equal. But Georgia's strength of schedule is not strong enough to vault them up to the same status as the committee would tell you a conference champ exists at. And so if that doesn't elevate Georgia to being equivalent in their mind's eye with a one-loss Pac-12 champ, it's irrelevant whether they beat them head-to-head. The only way that head-to-head ends up mattering is if the committee says, okay, Pac-12 champ Oregon, one-loss Georgia here, they didn't win their conference, we still think they're equal. At that point, Georgia goes ahead of an Oregon because they got the head-to-head. So it gets really convoluted there. I don't think, to answer the question, I don't think a lot of people have thought about this because I think, well, most Georgia fans assume that they'll win this weekend. And therefore, they haven't let their mind really go there. They've maybe discussed it or they've maybe considered it. I don't think they've embraced it. And they shouldn't. They should expect to win. But, if we do have that, it would be really the huge shakeup, maybe the biggest shakeup of the season so far, only because that would be last year's national champ. Some of you would call them defending. I just call them last year's national champ that maybe on the outside looking in, and it's one of the big boys from the SEC, and they've only got one loss, and normally you're just afforded that. I'm not against it. Most of the time, your resume suggests that you can afford one loss, but maybe not for Georgia this year. Who knows? Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure and leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.